All right, and excellent. Here we are. Welcome, 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 welcome. So, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Right Plants, Right Place workshop that is part of the Landscape Success series presented by A&M AgriLife Extension Services and the Fort Bend Master Gardeners. I'm Christina with Fort Bend County Libraries, and today I have with me Suma Mudan and Peggy DeHemicourt. Suma is an advanced master gardener in Texas Superstar Plants, and Peggy is an advanced master gardener in Earthkind landscaping. Suma specializes in Texas Superstar Plants as well as garden design. She enjoys designing gardens and consulting in essential oils, teaching yoga and other wellness modalities. Being a pet mom is one of her most enjoyable activities. Peggy has been a past president of the Fort Bend Master Gardeners and has been a Fort Bend Master Gardener since 2003. She currently lives in Richmond and enjoys gardening for wildlife, especially birds. Thank you both for coming, and now I turn it over to you.
Okay, let me share my screen. Right. Hopefully you all can see that PowerPoint slide. And welcome, everybody. I'm Peggy. Appreciate that nice introduction. And Christina, we want to thank the library system for partnering with us to deliver this series of classes about how to landscape successfully using Earthkind practices. We really appreciate this partnership. Here's our names in print for those of you who would like to see them. And if you don't know what a master gardener is, let me just say that we are just members of the community who have a passion about gardening. And we joined the program and received incredible training from Texas A&M on horticulture. And in exchange for our training, we volunteer our time to share our knowledge with the community in various ways, including the kind of program you're seeing today. So thank you all for being here. Today's goal is to help you appreciate the importance of proper plant selection and to give you some resources to rely on in making good choices. Like all of the landscape success classes, this one is based on Earthkind landscaping principles. So I'm going to begin with a brief introduction of Earthkind landscaping. It's a set of landscaping principles developed by Texas A&M Extension Service, AgriLife Extension Service, and it's based on research-proven techniques that combines the best of organic and traditional gardening principles. And what it does is enables us to have maximum gardening success and at the same time preserve and protect the environment. Earthkind landscaping encourages water conservation. Now, it's kind of hard to think about the importance of water conservation when we're coming off of a week of maybe 8 inches or more of rain at our houses, but it's important because we can all remember the serious droughts that we find ourselves in from time to time. Not only that, but Texas water supply is under increasing pressure from growing populations and from these seasonal fluctuations in rainfall and our periodic droughts. And you know, it's been estimated that about 25% of our urban water supplies are used to irrigate our lawns and our gardens. And a lot of that is used inefficiently, meaning it runs off or evaporates, or it's used on plants that just require too much water. Earthkind landscaping encourages landscaping for energy conservation. You may not realize it, but you can change the microclimate around your home and the way that you plant trees and shrubs and save some money on your energy bills. It encourages us to reduce our reliance on fertilizers and pesticides, because when we don't choose those products wisely or when we use them incorrectly, they can harm the environment as they run off of our property, where they might pollute groundwater and surface water. and it encourages a reduction of yard waste entering the landfills. You know, every year, millions of tons of leaves and grass clippings and weeds and tree limbs and other organic debris from our yards ends up in our landfills. And it's estimated that about 20% of all the trash that goes to a landfill in Texas comes from our yards, which is incredible. And that costs us money. It costs Texans over $300 million a year, it's estimated, to collect and dispose of all of that trash. Earthkind landscaping is based on a set of 7 principles, which you see here on this slide. Today, Suma and I are going to be talking about one of those, appropriate plant selection. I'll cover some of the criteria for making plant selections, such as place, function, and resource efficiency. And then I'll demonstrate a cool online tool that we can all use called the Earthkind Plant Selector. And then I'll turn things over to Suma, who will discuss and explain the significance of Texas superstar plants. So when you get right down to it, the right plant is simply the one that's in the right place. And these conditions that you see here are the ones that need to be met for a plant to be in the right place. It's got to tolerate our summers. It's got to tolerate our winters. It has to be in the right sun exposure. It needs to be on a soil type that it's compatible with. And by that, I mean, you know, we have different types of soil: clay soil, sandy soil, alkaline, acidic soil, soil that's rich in organic matter, and soil that is lacking in organic matter. And it's got to tolerate the amount of rainfall that we receive every year. Let's start with heat tolerance. This is a map published by the American Horticultural Society. It's a heat zone map. And here in Southeast Texas, we typically have between 120 and 150 days a year where the temperatures reach 86 degrees or higher. So we're hot. I didn't have to tell you that. Compare that to the northern tier of states where you see some of those purple splotches. In those purple areas, people receive fewer than 7 days a year where they reach temperatures of 86 degrees or more. Common sense, right? Northern climates versus southern climates. But it's also common sense that a plant that's happy up there in those northern tiers of states may not survive our Texas summers. And then there's cold tolerance. This is a map published by the United States Department of Agriculture. It's the plant hardiness zone map, the one we're most familiar with. And it places us squarely in zone 9A. And here we have average extreme minimum temperatures of between 20 and 25 degrees. Well, the operative word there is average. And as we all know, this winter, we exceeded those minimum temperatures dramatically. So a plant that is rated for more southerly zones, say zones more southerly than we are, might not make it through an extraordinary winter freeze like we had this year. One of the things that we heard a lot about this year was people losing their bottlebrush trees during the winter storm. And it's interesting to look up bottlebrush and find out that it's rated for hardiness zones 9, 10, and 11. So here in Fort Bend County, we are in the most warm, the lowest hardiness zone for bottlebrush. In other words, we're in its most northern growing area. In a normal year, in a normal winter, when our average low temperatures might have dipped down into 30 or 28 for a few hours at night and bounced right back up again, that bottlebrush might have been just fine. We might have had a little bit of freeze damage we'd have to clean up. But that's not what happened this year, as we all know. and the bottle brush struggled, and many of them just didn't make it. So knowing that, my point is here, knowing something about a plant's hardiness zone range can be important to your plant selection. Bottle brush is a good plant. It's a good Earthkind plant. But if you're investing money in a plant that you want to have for a very long time, you might have to think about the fact that we're going to have these extraordinary years when it might survive and might have to be replaced. So geographically speaking, this is a description of our place in the world where choosing plants is concerned. We have hot summers. We have, as a rule, fairly mild winters with some freezing temperatures and an occasional extreme year like we had this year. Most of us are growing on clay soils. And on average, we get between 42 and 46 inches per year of rainfall. But again, that is an average. I think we've been in a rainy period for the last couple of years. I know at home I measure rainfall and record it. And in 2019 and 2020, in each of those years, I recorded a total of 59 inches of rain at my house. And this year is starting off as, with a bang where rainfall is concerned too. So our plant selections kind of have to take all of this into account. We won't always get the rain that we're getting now. We'll fluctuate into drought conditions, and having drought tolerant plants is good. But when we're wet, like we are right now, we have to practice smart growing methods like using raised beds to keep our plant roots out of the clay soil, which holds moisture longer. So now I want to take you a little closer to home and talk about your landscape and get you to think about whether you're dealing with sun or shade. Plants have sunlight requirements as a rule that have to be met in order for them to perform to their fullest. A plant that needs to grow in the shade isn't going to be happy and might not even make it in the full sun. A plant that needs full sun, if it's planted in the shade, might look a little bit spindly. And if it's a bloomer, it may not bloom as much as you'd like it to. So knowing a plant's need for sunlight is important to making plant selections. And I know from experience how this can change over time. 29 years ago, we built a house on a bare, large lot. I planted lots of planting beds to satisfy my gardening desires, but I also planted lots of trees because that lot was bare. Well, now 29 years later, trees have matured, and I struggle to find a spot of full sun in my planting beds to plant some of my favorite plants, and I've had to transition to more shade tolerant plant selections. So this sun versus shade situation will change even in your yard, I imagine, over the years. Think about your yard. The amount of sunlight hitting your planting beds is affected by a lot of things. It's affected by your house and your fence. These are structures that cast shadows. If you've got trees, those trees are casting shadows and shade. And then, of course, you've got the movement of the sun through the sky day after day, morning sun versus afternoon sun. And you've got the effect of the sun moving towards the southern hemisphere in the winter, which affects shade patterns in your yard. So all of these factors should be taken into account when we think of the right place in our landscape for a plant in terms of its sun and shade needs. And then there's the consideration of function. The right plant is the one that fulfills the function that you have in mind in the landscape. By function, I mean, what's its mature height and width? How often have we gone to the nursery and come home with plants growing in 1 gallon or 3-gallon pots and put them in the spot that we had in mind for them, only to realize after time that they want to get 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide, and we didn't quite have that amount of room for them. It's important to know that going in. Knowing how fast they're going to grow, what form and growth habit they're going to assume when they're mature is important. You don't want them to be maintenance headaches and plants that you have to shear or trim or prune all the time just to keep yourself happy. And then there's the aesthetic quality that you're looking for. What kind of leaf color might you like, or texture, leaf texture? Do you want interesting bark? Do you want flowers and maybe fall color? These are all important in making your decisions. You know, every kind of plant serves a certain function. Trees give us shade and structure. They might bloom and they might give us fall color. Shrubs come in a variety of sizes, shapes, textures, growth habits. Sometimes they flower. Vines can add vertical interest if you have them growing up a structure. Ground covers solve lots of problems if you use them in problem areas where turf grass maybe won't grow very well or hard to mow areas. Perennials are wonderful because they give us long-lasting, vivid color season after season. They come back every year. Annuals also give us long-lasting and vivid color, but they give us those special features for a specific season. And then they have to be replaced, and they can easily be replaced. And then, of course, turf forms the palette and pulls it all together for us. So after considering all the things I've just covered, the USDA planting zone, your sun versus shade exposure in your yard, what function you want a plant to perform, then you're ready to choose a plant. And Texas A&M recommends that we use both Texas native plants and well-adapted non-natives because of their resource efficiency. They're well suited to our growing conditions. They need very little supplemental water or supplemental fertilizer, and they are more pest resistant, keeping us from using pesticides. And these pictures just bring it home for me. Compare the beauty of this native yaupon in berry to the non-native crepe myrtle in full bloom. Two stunning examples of native and well-adapted plants for the landscape. So what's a native? So a native plant, excuse me, I just had a little distraction. A native plant is a plant that evolved here. It's at home with our climate, our soils. It evolved with the insects that exist here and other pests, so it peacefully coexists with all the conditions that exist in our part of the world. On the other hand, an adapted plant is one that evolved somewhere else, but somewhere with similar soil types and climate and hardiness zones to ours. And because of that similarity, it was introduced to our Texas landscapes through the horticulture industry. So that's how those well-adapted plants got here, because they were thought to be good specimens for our landscapes. I'm sorry, something, I'm going to have to correct for something here. I gave Suma permission to annotate something, and I'm going to have to undo it because I can't move my slide deck. If I can figure out how to do that.
I did not see any permissions.
I had a pop-up asking me to give you permission to do something.
Okay.
And now I can't move my slides. So go to annotate. Let's see, annotate. Stop annotating. Okay, I may be back in business. Yes, I stopped the annotation, whatever that means. You learn something every time you do one of these things. So, native versus well-adapted plants, they're both good for our landscapes. They're both available to us in the nursery trade. Why use natives? Because they're drought and heat tolerant, they like our native soils, they're pest and disease resistant, and that makes them resource efficient. We won't have to add lots of water, fertilizer, or use pesticides as a rule. And besides that, they attract beneficial wildlife like birds, butterflies, and pollinators. And they support beneficial organisms that we need to keep our sort of ecosystems in balance. And of course, they're naturally beautiful. Now, you may be thinking that I should give you a word of caution, which I should. Native plants can be so happy in our environment that they may reseed or spread pretty aggressively, maybe more so than you'd like. But just know that that's sort of a maintenance issue for you if you're using natives. You'll have to control the reseeding, pulling the plants up that you don't want that are reseeding in your yard. That doesn't mean they're invasive. It doesn't mean they're a problem. It just means they are performing wonderfully, growing, reseeding, and multiplying. That's the life of a plant when it's in the right place. And here are some examples of some of our wonderful Texas natives. In these pictures, you see Gulf muley grass, red yucca, Texas sage, Mexican bush sage, Hamelia, autumn sage, yellow bells, pride of Barbados, American beautyberry, crossvine, butterfly weed, Salvia greggii, I said that, autumn sage, to name a few. Stunning plants for our landscape and very resource efficient. And then here are other adapted plants that have been brought to us by the trade, which are also stunning and can be very happy here, like citrus and crepe myrtle and Chinese fringe tree, many bulbs like amaryllis, roses and rosemary, pomegranate, to name a few. So, now that you've considered all the criteria I've laid before you and you're ready to go to the nursery, how do you figure out where to turn for help? Well, the good news is Texas A&M has provided us wonderful resources on a website that I'm going to demonstrate for you in a minute. That website is the one you're seeing here on the static page, Aggie Horticulture. The web address is aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. And as you can see, there are lots of resources here for the homeowner. And we're going to go now, I'm going to leave this PowerPoint presentation and share my web browser with you. And we're going to go look at the Earthkind landscaping website and play with the Plant Selector tool. So give me just a minute to do that. All right, hopefully now you're seeing Aggie Horticulture. Somebody tell me if you're not. This is the wonderful website I want you to make your go-to resources anytime you need help with landscaping questions. As you can see here on the home page, there are fruit and nut resources for homeowners. There are vegetable resources for homeowners, and Earthkind landscaping needs resources for homeowners. So I'm going to take us there to Earthkind Landscaping. Here's the home page where you can learn more about what I've mentioned to you today and more about all of the classes, in fact, that we're bringing to you in Landscape Success with the library this year. So here on the home page for Earthkind, we can use the Earthkind Plant Selector. And just let me set this up for you just a minute. What this is a database of hundreds of plants that have been rated based on their heat tolerance, their drought tolerance, their pest tolerance, and their soil and fertility requirements based on a growing region. And then they're given a number called an Earthkind index value. And the range of those values is from 1 to 10. And the number, that measurement they're given, is based on all 5 of those resource efficiency categories. So the higher the number, the more resource efficient the plant is for the region you're looking at. And when you have plants that are rated 8 or higher, they're considered to be extremely resource efficient and recommended as good choices for our landscape. So let's make some plant selections. I'm going to search the Earthkind Plant Selector. And here you see that you start out by choosing your growing zone, your hardiness zone. You can either put your zip code in, or you can use your cursor to touch your county area on the map. I'm going to do that. We're going to choose Zone G, which is Southeast Texas. And then you come to this page where you can create a search on your own. You can search by a plant's common or scientific names. You can think about the kind of plant you're looking for. Do you want a shrub, a small tree, etc.? You can search based on your sun exposure, or the flower color you'd like to have, or when you want a plant to bloom, or its leaf characteristics. What I'm going to do, well, let me back up a step. If you use this search criteria, then you can search right here by that criteria. But what you will get are all the plants in the database that satisfy that criteria, and some of them may be outside your hardiness zone. So you'll just have to be careful to realize that when you're looking them over. What I like to recommend is what's at the bottom of this page. It says, just want a quick listing. So we're going to generate a list of plants for our area with an Earthkind index of 8 or greater. So I'm going to say that, show me a quick list. And here you have 9 pages of plants that meet that criteria that you can browse. I'm going to go to page 3 because there's one in particular I want to show you. It's one of my favorite native plants. You either love this plant or hate it. I haven't happened to love it. And it's Turks Cap. So I'm going to choose Turks Cap. And this takes me into a page all about Turks Cap. You see pictures, you see its common and scientific name, and this description, which I'll read to you. It's an outstanding native Texas herbaceous perennial. It spreads from root suckers and seeds. It has dark green lobed red maple-like leaves. It has 1-inch long upright red flowers. It's adaptable to sun or shade, but it's best in partial shade. It works excellently in naturalized landscapes, shaded understories. It can be a nice tall ground cover and a hummingbird plant. So below that description, you see those same criteria sort of listed in a more easy to see way. And note that it has fruit characteristics. Sometime in the end of August, early September, it stops blooming and you get berry-like seeds that the birds love to eat, which is why it's one of my favorite plants, because I like to garden for birds. And while it's blooming, the hummingbirds just eat it up. It's just wonderful to have for hummingbirds. So you see its height and its width, which can depend on the exposure you have it in. But what I want to focus your attention on now is its Earthkind index. And here's how it got that 10 rating. It was rated high in heat tolerance, low in water use, low in soil requirements, high in pest resistance, and low in fertility requirements. Now I'm going to touch this explanation of that breakdown. And you can see that it has a high heat tolerance, and that definition is here. It says it will typically provide suitable landscape performance during the summer growing season. Well, that's what we want, right? It has low water index, which means it typically will not require supplemental irrigation during the growing season. That's my kind of plant. It has a low soil index, which means that it will not require modifications of the native soil to perform suitably in the landscape. It has high pest tolerance, which means it typically will require no physical or chemical controls for insect, mite, or disease pests. And lastly, it has a low fertility index, which means that it will typically not require the use of any supplemental nitrogen for suitable performance in the landscape. Well, in my book, that's a perfect plant. But I want to compare it to I'm going to do another plant search just for another quick illustration. So I'm going back to the Earthkind Plant Selector. We'll stay in region G. This time I'm going to search by a common name, which is shrimp plant. I've grown shrimp plant for years, so I'm just putting in its common name and I'm coming down search by the above criteria. And here it is. Notice its Earthkind index is 7. It didn't make the quick list because the quick list only showed us plants rated 8 or higher. So I've been growing shrimp plants for years and I like them and they perform okay for me, but I've always felt like they're not quite growing up to their expectations. When I see pictures of beautiful shrimp plants, I know that that's not my shrimp plant. So it occurred to me to look them up one day to see what I was doing wrong. Well, the answers lie in this Earthkind index. The shrimp plant has high heat tolerance. That's good, right? It can take our summer, but it's got medium water use, medium soil requirements, but it has high pest resistance, but medium fertility requirements. So let's go look at that. It's got medium water index. So that means it's typically going to require supplemental irrigation 1 to 2 times a week during the growing season. Well, I don't use an irrigation system on my garden beds, and I don't go out with a hose and water things unless they're in dire straits. So no wonder my shrimp plant doesn't always look its best. And let's take a look at fertility. I think that was rated medium as well. So it says shrimp plant will typically require 1 to 2 pounds of supplemental nitrogen for suitable performance. Well, I'm sort of a lazy gardener. I don't apply I hardly ever apply fertilizer to plants unless I'm spreading some compost around when I'm in the mood from my compost bins. So, this is a good example of why I'm not getting great satisfaction out of my shrimp plant. And it also affords me an opportunity to share with you how you can sort of solve some of your own problems by using this Earthkind Plant Selector. So now I'm going to go back to the main Earthkind site. I know a lot of us love roses, and I just want to make you aware of Earthkind roses. Oh, let's see. Here they are, Earthkind roses. So the Earthkind name is a special designation that's been given to certain rose cultivars by Texas AgriLife Extension Service through their Earthkind landscaping program. They've earned that designation after they survived extensive research and field trials, and only those roses that demonstrated superior pest tolerance combined with outstanding landscape performance earned the name. So if you're interested in adding roses to your landscape, check these out. Let's look at the Earthkind rose cultivars. They're organized here based on their size. You can see that there are dwarf shrub roses, small shrub roses, medium shrub roses, mannerly climbers, and vigorous climbers. And I would say the vigorous climbers might be the ones that would look like they're eating your house if they were happy enough. So for each of these roses, you can make a selection and learn more about them. And you get this wonderful page of information that tells you how it will grow, its height and width, how far apart to space them if you're going to grow more than one, describes its bloom, gives you advice, gives you its hardiness zones, and gives you some ideas about landscape use. There's even a PDF handout for each one of the Earthkind roses. So if roses are in your landscaping future, we encourage you to become familiar with Earthkind roses and give them a try. Well, that concludes my comments. I'm going to ask if anybody's monitoring the chat room, if there is a question or two I might answer at this point before Suma starts her presentation. And surely we'll come back to question and answer at the very end. I just don't want to get us too bogged down at this point in Q&A. So let me hear from somebody, please.
If someone is asking about drift roses,
Anything in particular about drift roses?
are they, I think, how do they relate to Earthkind?
I don't think the drift roses, I don't think any of the ones that are currently designated Earthkind roses are drift. And I'm not familiar with what might currently be under trial and being trialed for future designations. It doesn't mean that drift roses are bad necessarily. They just might not be as pest resistant. And I'm speculating now, and I don't want to do that. But certainly, there are many good roses out there on the market. Not all of them have yet been trialed and earned the name Earthkind. It's a roundabout answer. Is there anything else, Suma?
I think somebody asked which nurseries sell native plants, so I mentioned Buchanan's and Joshua's, two nurseries that I know of that carry native plants.
Sure. There are many, those are two good ones. Fort Bend County has several family-owned nurseries where you can find some native plants. And if you're not finding what you're looking for, ask the nurseryman to tell them that you're interested, because if they know we want them, we might get more of them. The Native Plant Society also has an annual wildscapes workshop and plant sale, which, like everything else during the pandemic, has been kind of out of commission, although I think they did have an online plant sale last year. But that's another good way, one time a year, if you'll watch for that, to think about native plants and find some that you might otherwise have a hard time finding. All right, I think I should stop sharing my screen so Suma can share hers. So let me see if I can figure out how to do this. All right, Suma, it's all yours.
All right, thanks so much for that fantastic presentation, Peggy. And because I am going to build up on that, you laid the foundation. Now let me put the bricks on and let's do that. So I'm going to share my presentation. So can everybody see the slides and hear me? Okay, just give me a thumbs up or just let me know.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so you have heard a little bit about myself, and the only thing I would like to add is what brought me to this place. Like, why did I become a master gardener and why did I specialize in Texas Superstar plants? I think that a lot of people can relate to that journey. I moved from Northeast where I was used to gardening from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and that's when we were actually able to step out. And I was so familiar with cold hardy. But when I moved to Houston, I was completely lost. Like I still tried growing peonies, I still tried growing Japanese maples, and they all died on me. And then I decided, okay, this is not working, so I have to go and actually learn it properly. So that's when I joined the Fort Bend Master Gardeners and started learning about plants that do well here. And then it took me when they had the first session of this advanced training in Texas Superstars, I signed up, and I'm so happy that I did that because those are the backbone of my garden now. They do extremely well and they help me get over my northeast frenzy and settle into the southern charm. So like uh, you have heard Peggy talk about the Earthkind landscaping fundamentals, and those are the ones that actually will help you set the stage for your landscape, for your home landscape. Once you learn all the fundamentals, then your next task is to find the plants. So you have the right tools. Now you need to find the right plants. You know the right place. As she explained to you how you should look for the sun, the shade, and all the things, irrigation, water requirements, fertilizer, all those things. But now, where do you get the plants? So these two programs go hand in hand. One lays the foundation, the other builds on that. And so this is one of the easiest ways that I can explain how a superstar plant grows. So a lot of times we find plants growing in cemeteries and there's nobody there to water them. There's nobody there to fertilize them. There's nobody there to prune them, but they flourish. And believe it or not, several of the superstar plants were picked up from wayside and from cemeteries and from neglected areas, and they were put into the trial programs, and that's when they made the cut to the superstar. So what does it mean to be a Texas superstar? Um, the plant has to be very reliable. It has to also look well. And during the trials, I'll talk about the trials in a minute, the plants received minimal soil preparation, minimal water, or no pesticides. If you remember, all these go hand in hand with Earthkind landscaping principles. So at the end of the trials, they were able to come up with a few plants that actually were as tough as nails and Texas stuff. So if you are in the market for a plant that you can throw in the garden and it survives and flourishes in spite of your neglect or your brown thumb, that is a Texas superstar plant. So what is the criteria to select for being selected into this group? So the plant must be unique. Just because it's a tough plant, we cannot just bring a weed and say, okay, this is a Texas superstar. So the plant has to be unique, and it also has to have ornamental characteristics. As we go through the plant list, you will see how beautiful some of these plants are. And it has to consistently perform well. It's like not you bloom once and you're done. So it has to give you years of enjoyment and seasons of bloom. And it has to be pest resistant. That means you don't have to, wake up in the morning and take your pesticides and fungicides and walk in the garden. So that should be minimal. And another main criteria is these plants should be easily propagated. That means if you are not able to duplicate and multiply these plants, it's tough for the plant growers to market these plants. So they should be very easy to be propagated. And they also should be attractive in the sales counter. So if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or any of the big box stores, they also sell this. I'll talk about it later. And they should be able to call you. So they should be able to compete with the other sexy plants and still make the cut. And when we say Texas Superstar, one of the very common questions that I get is, Texas is so huge, it's like 1,000 miles across. And there are so many different climate zones here. As you can see from this map, from the Panhandle, it's zone 9B, almost zone 10, to the Lubbock region where it is zone 6B. It's cold. Where I came from in Pennsylvania, it was zone 6. So it's as cold as that. So how can you say a plant is a Texas superstar when there are so many varied climate zones? We'll talk about that. So these plants are tested. Those are the 4 testing sites that they chose because they wanted to make sure that these plants survived in all these various climates. And they were hardy. They tolerated not only the hot and humid summers, but the hot and dry summers of regions like Dallas, and they were disease and insect resistant. Uh, Generally, when we have face-to-face trainings, we also give out a color brochure of Texas Superstar plants, and unfortunately now we are not able to do that. But if you go to the Texas Superstar website, you can go to the color brochure. So if Nancy, if you can put a link for the website, that will be great. So there you will see these symbols. So it will talk to you, it will show you what's the water usage for each plant, whether it is deer resistant, whether it is attractive to pollinators. And there is one other great information in that brochure is like it also tells you the planting times. So if you plant in spring, you will get summer bloomers. Planted in summer, you will get fall bloomers, and planted in late summer and fall, you'll get winter or early spring. So one of the tips is pick a few from each one. So throughout the year, you'll have something blooming in your garden. And now let's talk about the specific plants. One would think like this program, Texas Superstar Trial Program, was started in the early 1980s, and it was actually formalized in 1989. And you would think in the last 35 years, we would have gotten so many labeled as Texas Superstars, but not so, because it takes a long time to go through the field trials. It takes like various amount of effort to make sure that these plants perform in these various climate zones and still make the cut. So as I end the talk, you will see how few plants make the cut each year. So in these Texas Superstar plants, there are some that are annuals, some that are perennials, some that are biennials, and some that are woody. So we will go through each category briefly, depending on the time we have. So annuals are the ones that like flourish through one blooming season, but depending on the climate, like we had several winters that are very mild. So if the winters are mild, the annuals may behave like perennials, and our perennials may behave like annuals in colder regions like Dallas and up north. So and if you get another winter storm like Uri, even the perennials may die. So we have to keep that in the back of our mind. But this is a general categorization. So one of the most popular one in the annual category is Angelonia. And if you're familiar with buying color plants for each season, people generally in the fall, they start like planting like things like pansies and snapdragons. So they will flourish during the fall, and they may die back a little bit, and then they will re-emerge in spring. But after mid-spring, they actually die. So then you have to fill the gap. So these Angelonia, the plants, they fill that gap, and that's why they are called summer snapdragons, because they have a very long blooming period, and they like perform a lot of functions in the garden. And now that you have the right plant, what is the right place? So you can plant this in full sun, and since these are anywhere from like 1 to 3 feet, depending on the plant, you can plant them in the mid border, or even the edge of the border. And of course, we can't talk about plants without talking about Texas bluebonnets. And I'm sure going on a bluebonnet tour is one of the traditions for many of us, either taking pictures with our pets or kids. And this was one of the first ones that participated in the trials of Texas Superstars. So these are some of the ones that made the cut, and you can see the brilliant blue, and there is a story behind how the maroon bluebonnets came around. You see, it's more normal to see blue, white, and red, and they were trying to come up with experiment had come up with Texas flag, the colors of which are blue, white, and red. But then one of the plantsmen, who is also he has introduced several plant introductions. He said, okay, who cares about the Texas flag? Let's do the Aggie colors. So he wanted maroon. So they experimented, and finally they were able to develop a blue bonnet that's maroon. So the blue bonnets thrive where you can naturalize them. If you have an area in your garden that you can just sow some bulbs and let them spread year after year, they'll be very happy. So I was told in my training that one caution about blue bonnets is don't plant the maroon and blue close by, because maroon will the blue will take over the maroon. So just keep that in mind. And this is this year's picture, and this year I think because of the freeze, or I don't know why, but they were spectacular. So another plant that is a Texas superstar is Glo Globe Amaranth. These are also called bachelor buttons and gomphrena, and they come in 3 colors and also bicolor. And these love the humidity and the heat. So if you are looking for in July and August when everything is dying down, these plants like Angelonias and gomphrenias, they do extremely well. Sometimes you may get a little bit of fungus, but if you cut back at the end of August or something, prune down a little bit, they will thrive again in fall. So what is the right place? Full sun. And since these are like single stalk flowers, they make excellent cut flowers, and you can use them in borders and also mixed containers. So larkspur, talking of moving from the northeast, I was used to having the lush beauty of delphiniums, and sometimes you find delphiniums in Costco, and they're very, very attractive, and you bring them and try to plant them in your garden, and they may bloom whatever is there on the plant, and they may never show their face again to you. But then we have the larkspurs. So larkspurs are not as flush as the delphiniums, but they are consistent, like reliable bloomers, and they also self-seed. That means next year, without you doing anything, you may find plants popping up in your yard. So larkspurs also come in 2 colors, pink and purple, and they both are dainty and very pretty, and they also make beautiful flower arrangements. So if you have any questions, please let me know, because I'm not keeping an eye on the chat. So another plant, actually, when I first looked at it, I thought this is a tropical plant. This Rio series Mandevilla, this is also made the cut to be called as a Texas superstar because it performs very well. And again, if the winter is mild, it will survive and then it will come back next year. So the Mandevilla can be grown as a sprawling shrub or in a container, or you can give it a stake and make it into a climbing vine. So there are so many options for Mandevilla. Mandevilla also comes in a few colors. So the right place is full sun, but it really appreciates afternoon shade. Otherwise, it gets a little burnt out in the Texas summers. Again, like I mentioned, it will look nice with a nice slim trellis in the middle of the pot. And this is one of my favorites, Laura Bush Petunia and Tidal Wave Silver and Cherry Petunias. So Petunias are very hardy, and these are actually the backbones of the fall planting. But I found out that these particular varieties of Petunias, they will reseed. Right now, my containers where I had them before last year, now they're full and flowering, and I see Laura Bush sprouting up here and there throughout my yard. So they fill with such nice color. And especially the combination of tidal wave, silver and cherry petunias is unbeatable in either a hanging basket or on a slope where it has the ability to trail down. So beautiful plants. So this is another very tough plant, the pentas. Pentas come in, now they have more varieties, even in Texas Superstar category. So if you find pentas, do grab them because they will give you a long season of bloom, very long season of bloom. If you plant in late spring, like as of now, and you can see the blooms through the end of fall, and sometimes they may come back later in the year. So right place is full sun. It comes in different heights, so you can either place it in the front of the bed or middle of the border. And it also attracts hummingbirds and butterflies, so you can make it a part of your pollinator garden. So when I say pollinator garden, you should have pollinators throughout your yard, especially if you have fruit trees, if you have vegetable gardens. Make sure you plant the pollinators close by so that you can lay a welcome mat to the bees and to the butterflies, so they will help with your produce. Make sure that you have several of these scattered throughout your garden. So Cora, periwinkle, Vinca is called the periwinkle, and this has become a staple in landscapers, builders. So some of these plants that are Texas superstars are used so abundantly by landscapers because they perform so well and they're so attractive, either in the home gardens or in the public places where they have neighborhood entrances and all. So you see them as soon as the late spring comes, you start seeing Vincas. Vincas come in several colors, also in bicolor. So this particular Cora series is resistant to a specific disease that Vincas are prone to. And some of these have the trailing habit, so they will look lovely in a hanging basket. They will look great in borders. Wherever you want a splash of color, you can plant the Vincas. And I found out that interestingly, these Vincas do better even in part shade. So that's the bicolor. It's beautiful, spectacular. So the other this is one of the most popular ones for cut flower businesses, cut flower gardens. If you want flowers to bring inside the house, this is one of the most popular one, zinnias. So the series Profusion and Sahara series, these perform extremely well, and they provide you not only color throughout the season, throughout the long blooming season. You can plant in late spring for summer blooms, but they do much better in the fall. So start planting in midsummer or late summer for fall. So for us, fall is not like September. Fall is December in Houston. So if you plant them in August or something, you will get a very long blooming season. And one design tip I want to give you, putting my designer hat, is you can combine with blue salvias and these orange or red zinnias, and they will look spectacular. So now talking about perennials. So perennials are plants that will come back year after year for many years. There are a lot of reasons the plant may disappear from your garden. Uh, um, Not because it's not a perennial, but we had a situation like that recently. So in February, if you have talked to anybody, everybody was depressed, everybody was down in the dumps because everything looked like it was dead. Uh, so there are situations, there are these extreme situations, but hopefully like these are not very often. What I found out was, so these are the backbone of the gardens. We may have lot of wishes, lot of passions, like some people who migrated from the Asian countries may have a passion for tropical plants, but those need pampering, those need more care and more work. But if you want your garden to look full and like to have something going on throughout the year, perennials are your best bet. So you have to pick some of these perennials, some of the native plants like Peggy talked about, because you have to provide not only for yourself, you also have to provide for the wildlife. And these generally don't have the long blooming cycle that like an annual, because they don't spend all their energy and die in one cycle. They come back every year. And the perennials, some may be evergreen, some may be root hardy in the sense that they may die down, but they will resprout from the roots the following year. And some may self-sow, like I mentioned larkspur. So some of the plants may self-sow and come back next year. So this is, there are a lot of times when, when I am asked about problem areas. One of the problem areas is under the oak trees in the front of the house. So we have a lot of shade, and every year I'm sure you also go through the thinning of the branches to get more light into the garden. But this is one plant that will thrive in shade, in partial shade, and it will look beautiful because of the bright yellow color. So Texas Gold Columbine, a great plant for shady spots. So it also, to create that mass appeal, you may want to plant in a clump, not just one plant in a somewhere in the corner. So try to mass plant, and it'll look spectacular. So this one, the Princess Caroline grass, it's a it's a regal plant. It is huge, humongous, and the right place for this is full sun and in a spot by itself. So it needs to be given its own limelight. You cannot combine this with anything else, at least not on the sides. It is one of the unusual colors. We always look for burgundy to create that contrast, because we have several shades of green. You can very easily create a green garden, but to break that color and to create the contrast, you need something that makes a statement. And this grass is such a plant. It makes a statement. It's tall and regal, and um, in my experience, it was spectacular if you planted it behind a couple of boulders, big rocks. So it will gracefully, the stems will flow over on the rocks, and it's heat tolerant, so it does extremely well. And it is a very unusual color, but make sure that you have the space for it. This is one of my very favorite plants, and I also have a story because I was very enamored when I read the story of Dr. Moy, and he's an immigrant from Hong Kong, and he went through several hardships, but he introduced a lot of plant species. He worked in the San Antonio Botanical Garden, and he gave us a lot of beautiful plants. So this is a perennial hibiscus. It's very hardy. It comes back every year. I have had it in my garden for about 8 years now. And the bloom is huge. It's about 12 inches. So this is a must-have plant in your garden. These two lantanas is, for some reason, lantanas personify Texas. And these two are trailing lantanas, and they both are superstars. They have the spreading habit and two beautiful colors. So you can contrast this with planting some other color in the back. So for yellow lantana, maybe you can plant salvias in the back. And for purple, you can plant angelonia, or you can contrast. So these will look beautiful if you have a slope, or if you have a elevated box like container, or in the hanging baskets. So they look beautiful. This is like, if you remember from Peggy's talk, there is a rating of 10. This is one of those. Either you love it or hate it, because it will show up everywhere in your garden. One good thing about Mexican petunia is, even though it shows up everywhere, it still remains in the clump form. So you have this clump of color, and it has all these beautiful colors. So you can actually make it look beautiful, because the flowers are beautiful, and you don't really need to do a thing. It's self-sustaining. It blooms, and it looks pretty all the year. And this is one rare color. This light blue is very rare in flowers. It's a real baby blue, and the blooms are very dainty. I found out that this also does much better with afternoon shade. You can plant it in full sun, but if you have an afternoon shade, it'll really thrive. And this is again a story, Henry Duelberg Salvia. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, a lot of plants were picked from cemeteries. This is one of those. You can see the tomb heads of Mr. Henry Duelberg and Mrs. Augusta Duelberg. And this is where the plants were picked up and put into the trial. And now all of us have them, and they are so, so beautiful. Very easy. They come back every year. And look at this. So the white and purple, and they attract butterflies that like there's no tomorrow. And this is one of the best plants to have in your garden. So right place is full sun. And you can get, by the way, you can get all this information in the electronic brochure on Texas Superstar website. There are a lot of salvias, and salvias, if you're into pollinator gardens, you cannot have a garden without salvias. Salvias are critical for butterflies, for bees. Bees are like, they are buzzing around salvias all the time, and also some of the hummingbirds. So I have planted salvias around my vegetable beds to attract bees. And there are so many varieties in salvias that you can make lot of designs in your garden, because there are so many heights, there are so many shades of blue. And you also get now purple salvias and red salvias and maroon salvias. So it's beautiful. And salvias are really, really good for pollinators. Full sun. So perennials are the semi-tropicals. These plants provide that lush tropical look to your gardens. And they may survive, because they may come back from the roots even if they look dead. So this is one of those, Pride of Barbados. This is also part of the Earthkind, and it is spectacular. The colors are very attractive, and the leaves are very attractive, and it can be a small attractive ornamental tree, and it did survive the freeze. So Durantha is one more thing that is that has multi-season interest and also great for birds. So these berries, the golden berries, the flowers turn into golden berries in the fall, and they make excellent flower arrangements as well as keep the birds happy. Of course, Esperanza is again a Texas statement, and it is very bright. The yellow color attracts people from far away, and it is a nice small tree. It is deciduous, that means it loses its leaves, but it will come back. So if you want, like once the blooms are done, you will find seed pods. So if you want more blooms, make sure that you remove the seed pods right away. And this is one of my most favorite plant because this has again a multi-season interest because it has this chartreuse color of the leaves and that rust color blooms, and so the blooms attract hummingbirds, and like it all my camellias came back from the freeze and they're all looking beautiful right now. So you need to have, and this can be grown as a big shrub, or you can prune it and keep it low. And this is again one more thing. If you want to do something interesting for your hedge, you can, instead of using the green meatballs, you can use Thryallis, and that will create. This is almost an evergreen, and it has this nice dainty yellow flowers. So there are some woody shrubs, and you can see these in several places, especially in Sugarland Costco. All the back behind Costco, you can see a hedge of this Texas sage. It's beautiful. And of course, now this year, the Vitex is like exploding. It's deeper lilac, and it is in full bloom everywhere. It's such an eye candy. Again, it's a small tree and very useful. So there are, Peggy mentioned some a bird, fall color. Again, coming from East Coast, I was like pining for fall color. I was trying to create something in my yard, but I don't have space to plant these big trees. But if you have space, these are some of the trees that create fall color. So all the trees that change color, they lose leaves. So you have to keep it in mind. If you want an evergreen, these trees are not for you. So there is Chanting Maple. The leaf is very attractive and it does change color. Of course, if the winters are a little, like if the falls are a little cooler, then the colors will be more vibrant. But this is, this can create some interest in our yards. And this Chinese pistache, this is spectacular. This has a lot of good color. The only caveat is that if you plant a female plant, apparently the seed pods fall everywhere and you start getting a lot of babies. So make sure if you are going to buy this tree for your yard, make sure you ask the nursery people whether it is a male plant. So there are also several specialty plants that are in the Texas Superstar category. I mentioned Dr. Moy before. He also introduced several categories of citrus. Of course, Florida is the citrus capital and Texas comes close. I don't know, maybe they are similar, I don't know. But there is, especially this year, I think if anybody had a severe heartache, it is losing citrus. A lot of us lost citrus for the due to the freeze, but some of the citrus that survived are categorized to withstand temperatures in the low teens, and some of them are orange frost. Anything with frost series in its name is more cold tolerant. So you may want to experiment with that. And these are not only they not only do well, but they also taste great. So there are some ornamental plants. These peppers are they are called ornamental, but they actually are edible. And these are spectacular if you use them in a mixed container. Look at those colors. They will look fantastic if you add flowers and these together. So there are a lot of, obviously I did not cover all the plants in the brochure. I covered only a few. These these are some of my most favorite ones, and I have all these in my garden, and all those have come back. They have survived the freeze, and they have come back, and some of them started blooming. This year, probably the blooming is a little delayed because of the late freeze, but these are some of my recommendations. So if you want to take a picture of the slide, go ahead and do that. And I was not going to talk about roses because some of the Earthkind roses also made the cut as Texas Superstar roses. But of course, you can get all that information from the Plant Selector or Texas Superstar website. And one of the main questions I get every year is, every time I give this talk, is where do we find these plants? Okay, even I got this annotation request, so I declined it, and hopefully okay, I was just trying to, okay. So, sorry. Okay, now again, I can't do that. I can't move my slides. Same thing happened to me. That happened to Peggy.
Suma, go to the top of your screen and you can stop annotation.
Okay, okay.
Or cancel annotation. It was an orange bar, I think, up there.
Yeah. Annotate, stop annotating. I did that.
That freed me up when it happened to me.
Okay, all right, good, thank you. So these are some of the nurseries where you can find these plants. So in our area, Enchanted Forest in our area, in the sense in Fort Bend County, Enchanted Forest, Enchanted Garden, Caldwell Nursery, and Blows is one of the surprising places which carries a lot of superstar plants. They generally have the maroon containers, the color of Aggies, and it will have this superstar logo on the container, and they will start carrying them as soon as they get them. And these are some of the places. Cornelius also announces periodically that it has Texas Superstar plants. So you can find the plants. Again, if you want to take a picture of the slide, please do. Okay. Now, I'm going to go through the slides quickly because I just wanted to give you an idea about how few plants are introduced each year because it takes a long time to go through the field trials. So in 2018, there is 1, Althea 2, and Hot Peppers 3, Strawberry 4. Only 4 plants were introduced in 2018. And 2019, 1, 2, 3, only 3 plants. And in 2020, for some reason, I think people were like spending more time since they didn't have to commute. There were a few more. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 plants were introduced in 2020. And in 2021, most of us have grown celebrity tomatoes. So this now, because it has consistently performed for more than 40 years, now they have named it as the Texas Superstar. And this is rock rose Fabonia. Again, this is a very dainty plant with beautiful shining pink. And this was also this year's introduction. So whenever you want to buy Texas Superstar plants, look for these tags or look for the logo. And also, if you don't find anything, just ask the nursery that you want to buy. And if you have the brochure with you, take it, open it on your phone, and you can look for the plant. So if you have any questions, you can ask me now, or you can put it in the chat, or you can call the hotline. So we have we have a excellent resource that you can call. You can either email or call and send your questions to us. And I think that's about it. I will stop sharing my screen. And are there any other questions? Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much for correcting me. I knew I was saying something wrong. I said a lot of things wrong, but thank you.
Suma,
Yeah.
we were doing a pretty good job in the chat, but I think two questions maybe you want to expand upon are the potential issues with common names of plants versus using genus and species to reference plants. As you know, many common garden plants go by the same name, same common name. And the other question is about potential invasiveness with several of the Texas Superstar designations and how they've addressed that.
Okay. So the common names, like I'll give you there are two examples I can give. One is the Vincas. So there are a lot of Vincas in the market, but the series, the Cora series are the ones which are labeled as Texas Superstars because they specifically bred them for disease resistance. So when you are looking for buying plants, you may want to look for the specific series. Again, zinnias, there are a million varieties of zinnias, but not Serena. What is the zinnia variety that's a superstar? Do you remember Boone? Boone is gone. And also the Angelonia, also there are several varieties, but the name you want to look for is the Serena series. As far as the invasiveness is concerned, like Peggy mentioned, if it made the cut to be graded as 10 on the Earthkind selector, it is not only very happy, it's also invasive. So you may want to keep that in mind when you're planting it in your yard, because we cannot and probably should not fight nature. So give it, like, for example, if you take the example of Turks Cap, the best place, the right place, it's a right plant, but the right place for it to be in a corner of the yard where it can spread and where it can be happy with spreading. So keep that in mind when you are like the best thing is to look at the Earthkind Plant Selector rating, and then also look at the characteristics of the Texas Superstar plant, and then decide whether you want it in your yard or not. But that's the only way I think that we should plan our gardens.
I'd like to add that we have to be careful about the term invasiveness, because that takes on a unique meaning. And, there are agencies in the state that monitor and publish information about noxious and invasive species. Sometimes we gardeners call an aggressive plant an invasive plant, and I think there's a difference. An aggressive reseeder, take poppies. I mean, how many of us love to grow poppies? And you have a few poppy plants one year, and then you have 200 reseeding in your yard the next. Yeah. I don't think we would call that invasive, because those poppies are not going to go out and supplant native species in a forest or something like that, like a Chinese tallow will, So being an aggressive and a prolific reseeder, or a plant that spreads through root division, is not always a bad thing. It's just it just is what it is. Now, there are invasive plants that we don't want in our environment, and you can find information about those online. So an Earthkind rating of 10 doesn't make a plant invasive. In my Turks Cap example, I know from experience, if they're reseeding in places I don't want them in a flower bed, I have to pull them. Technically, they're a weed. They're a plant I don't want in the place they're coming up. And I don't mind doing that, keeping the ones I want in the places where I want them. So, yeah.
Agreed. So if there are no other questions, then we can turn over the microphone to Christina. But before I do that, I just want to remind everybody that we have several more classes in the Landscape Success series. And these classes are going to be irrigation, using irrigation wisely in June, followed by July, successful home composting, August, understanding the lawn, September, controlling landscape pests and diseases, October, fruit trees for the backyard. Okay, there it is. So thank you for putting up the flyer. And all these classes will help a home gardener to have a successful landscape and a garden. Thank you so much for Christina and the Fort Bend County Libraries for partnering with us.
Thank you so much for partnering with us. This has been so informational and so great. And as I'm sure that you've seen from the chat, everybody really loved the presentation today. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you everyone else for coming as well. Like Suma said, we do have more events, and all the programs that were listed just now, you can register for at our website, which is www.fortbend.lib.tx.us, and I'm dropping that in the chat, and you'll register just like you did for today's event. We have other events also on the calendar, so check them out. But otherwise, thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you. All right, and I'll just let everyone leave on their own.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, I'm going to stop recording.